Describe your vision for Yachats for the next 5 years.
My vision for Yachats is that we work together as a community and develop a plan for the type of growth and progress that the majority of our community supports. And I think the way that happens is through getting our citizens to have trust in our city government, which I don't feel they have right now because of the communication issues. And I know that we hear that the council members, the incumbent council members tell us that they make every effort to communicate, but there is a problem. If you've got a community of 750, 800 people, and they don't feel like they know what's going on as far as our government is concerned. And that's because the current council doesn't talk to people. They don't get out of the community and talk to people. They don't talk to the businesses. They don't talk to the person walking their dog down the street. And that's where you truly find out what the community wants. And then I see development being in line with the vision statement that we have about Yachats in terms of recognizing the elements of nature that we have here. And I think that is so important. I think every choice we make needs to be about preserving the beauty that we have here and making sure that that is preserved for future generations.
Thank you.
As far as a personal
I have my
vision,
soccer watch here. We're going to time
you
this.
time me? A personal vision and a goal I have as to establish in Yachats is I would like to see us pursue an actual dark sky designation. I want to take on the lighting issue, and I will propose that we develop a plan and a timeline. The Planning Commission has developed a lighting ordinance, and I want to see that actively enforced. And that's my real vision, is to see it to where we can see the night stars, the night sky in 5 years.
If I were to pick one thing, one focal point for my Yachats vision for the future, it would be the Commons. For those of you who have lived here longer than 4 years or more, the Commons used to be a place where there was always something going on. It was a center for music, it was a center for theater, dance. We used to have kids performing all kinds of stuff in there, art, craft shows. I mean, it was a humming place. We've lost it. My feeling is that the Commons has been neglected. We've allowed the heating system to run down. We haven't fixed it. Or at least last time I heard, we hadn't fixed it. I realized there were some problems with the floor and the roof, but it just doesn't seem to be the inviting, welcoming, social center for the community that it once was. I would certainly like to rediscover that.
I agree with that. It was interesting when Heather Holm took over initially running the Commons. She gave tours of the Commons, and I wasn't really aware of what a state of disrepair the Commons was in.
Jim, could you talk to
Oh,
the
okay.
people in the back?
When I first got on the council, Heather Holm took over the management of the Commons. She's a local resident, lived here all her life. And she took groups of people on tours of the Commons. I hadn't really gone on a tour of the Commons. I hadn't gone in the basement, I hadn't gone in the back spaces, I hadn't gone into a lot of the areas of the Commons that weren't normally open to the public. And when I saw there was an amazing amount of deferred maintenance, things that had not been done. Since that time, we have replaced the flooring in the Commons, which was defective. The original flooring that was established, when was that put in? The initial flooring? About 5, 6, 7 years ago, was failing. We replaced that. The heating system has all been replaced with new ductless air units, and the roof has been replaced. It still has a lot of work that needs done. Oh, and by the way, the fire marshal said that we can no longer use the basement for the wine fountain for the kids. So we went in and braced that whole system up so we could go back and use that basement. I still don't think that's a good place to have the kids if we ever get them back in the commons and COVID goes away, because it really doesn't only have that one exit out of that basement in case of an earthquake. But the commons is, I think, an asset, just like I think the 501 building is an asset. I think we have assets that we should develop and continue to develop and continue to maintain. If you leave a building empty, like we left the 501 building for the last 6 years, it's going to deteriorate. So we need to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Well, I totally agree. The commons is the heart and soul of the city. And, you know, to dovetail what Jim said about the heating system, yeah, Greg, it has been replaced. What we had before was 12 residential heat pumps in various rooms around the commons. That's been replaced with one large commercial grade heat pump system that will allow us to heat and cool when necessary. We don't have to cool very often, but heat those rooms that, you know, where the heat pumps that we had failed. That new system is supplying those rooms with heat. For the heat pumps, the former heat pumps that are still working, the new system is not working in those rooms. The old ones are still using, and we'll continue to use those to heat those rooms until those die, and then we just flip a switch, and the new system will then transfer the heat to that. It's all been ducted for that. So that's all done, and it's there for the future. As Jim mentioned, we have a new roof put on the commons. The biggest thing that prevents the commons from being a hub of activity right now is COVID-19. I mean, we all know that. We can't even meet face-to-face for our city council meetings, our commission meetings, anything like that. It's all virtual these days. And once we finally get past that, whenever that may be, we'll be able to have people and have town halls again in the commons. God knows we've had in the past, when we had a public meeting about when we'd have a candidates forum put on by the League of Women City Voters, we'd have 100 or so people turn out in the multi-purpose room or in the 501 4 years ago, and it was a great turnout. We can't do that right now with COVID.
The question was vision, right? Yeah, the question was vision. So, John, back to vision. What is your vision for, John, your vision for Yachats the next 5 years in 30 seconds or less?
One thing I think we need to do is, you know, our community has changed. We've had people leave one reason or another. We've had other people move in. Our population has grown. So our population mix has changed over the last 10, 20 years. And a lot of the things that used to attract our volunteers and our citizens to come in and get involved in, some of those folks don't have the ability to get involved in those things. We need to replace them as volunteers. But I'd like to see more community ideas for other community involvement things that people want to have in this community we don't currently have. It doesn't have to be something big or complicated. We may have a lot of people here who, for instance, want to play bridge and get together with other people in a bridge club. That can be done easily in the commons. There are a lot of little things. If we pool our interests, say, what do you want? What kind of activities do you want in the commons? It's easy to put those activities together, and I think we need to reach out to the community and get that into it. Once COVID's done, so we can.
I also have a vision for the commons, and that would be to the opposite of what we've been charged to do by our city government, which is to make as much money as we can off of renting out the commons to outside groups and things like that. I believe the original intent of the commons was that it be a community. It's for the people who live here and who live in, you know, our whole broad community. And when we started, you know, having all these events, which I understand is a good way to bring money in, it became very difficult to plan we always had to have things on weeknights and, you know, different things like that. The whole summer you don't get to use it because it's always booked up for weddings and things like that. So I would like to be able to find at least a better balance, if not a better mission. And the mission should be to grow the community. And that's kind of my vision, is that we would get like a community coordinator or something like that in the Commons and help make people, come back with activities when we can, of course. But we should be able to get in there, you know, well, we'll see, maybe we won't. But the other thing that I think is really important is just to have a sense of the importance of community, and for the government to stay out of the community stuff. We don't need to have the city government have a Halloween party for the children. That should be something that somebody's coordinating out of the community in the Commons. Or maybe the Chamber of Commerce will sponsor it. You know, those are the kind of things. I think our government is taking on too much of stuff that's really, they don't need to do that. It's not their job, you know. And so that'd be part of my vision. The other part of my vision has to do, I'm a big promoter of the Lincoln County Climate Action Plan, and we're hoping to get this initiative on the ballot to be carbon neutral by 2035, and I think that part of what needs to happen in the Commons, and as a big community activity, is that we start working on all the things we need to do to make Yachats greener, including, in my dreams, a better transit system, including shuttles and things like that. But just a worker transit system so that the bus comes through here several times a day and we can park cars elsewhere. So we kind of plan for people, not cars.
I agree with the Commons of Community Place. My vision is that we will have a vision for 2030 with all of the citizens participating in developing that vision, that we will have activities going on in the off-tourist months that will provide revenue for all of our businesses and for the city. And finally, we will have a rock wall on Ocean View Drive rather than metal protector. I imagine that rock wall down by the Sea Lion Cave, I see that as a beautification that will be here for years, and that's my goal to have that.
The very large COVID outbreak in early June at Pacific Seafood in Newport is the main driver of the COVID-19 cases that spread throughout Lincoln County, and for months and months slowed the county's move into phase 2 of the state's reopening process. Lincoln County Health Department leaders said before June they were worried about an outbreak in Newport's seafood processing plants, but apparently were unable to access those plants. Question: should the county have acted differently and earlier? How? Was there a missed opportunity that would have changed the whole trajectory of COVID-19 cases in Lincoln County, which really is an outlier among rural counties in Oregon?
It's a great question, one that I have dealt with many times, and a lot of people, I find, do think that we as a county, as a public health department, have enforcement and regulatory authority that we simply do not have. That yes, this came onto our radar screen after an earlier outbreak this spring at the Pacific Seafood operations in Astoria, where I believe about 30 of their employees became ill, and they weren't even operating at full capacity. So we sure did see this as a potential for trouble. And we reached out to them and offered resources, offered to help facilitate testing of their employees. And they pretty politely but firmly declined, said, nope, nope, we've got this under control. And a couple of days before the news became public about I think it ended up being 124 cases of Pacific Seafoods, we were told this was coming, but really we had no tool in our toolkit that would have allowed us to intervene more proactively. I've had conversations with both Representative David Gomberg and staff of Senator Arnie Roblin about, is this an opportunity where we should have a conversation that where maybe county public health does need more legal and regulatory authority? And I think after a debacle like this, probably a lot of people would say yes. On the other hand, I know the legislature is reluctant about bringing down too heavy a hand of enforcement. I really wish we could have done differently, but again, I don't see where we had the power to do that.
It's disappointing for a company like that to have that kind of outbreak. You would assume, they would have the standard operating procedures to handle something like this. They deal with OSHA regulations and all that sort of thing. If the county's offering their assistance or their technical expertise, and the company is not taking that, there's limits to what we can do. However, as far as enforcement actions or what our health department can do, I think there are ways to kind of parlay that in with COVID. We can get fined at our restaurant for leaving food outside of the fridge by the county. And I feel like the county in some ways can, work towards an enforcement policy related to COVID if that's necessary. I do think that there are other agencies that enforce that. I know in the restaurant business or bar business, if you don't have the certain protocols in place, OLCC will pull your license. You won't get you won't have a liquor license. So that enforcement's out there. I don't know, how we go about working that into the county and if it's necessary. But it's truly disappointing that happened here in the county, and I wish we could have tackled that sooner and been a little more proactive.
Joe, first, just the last question. Describe your vision for Lincoln County. What does that look like in the next few years for you?
Hopefully in the next few years, we're going to have a county that's gotten through COVID, and we're going to have our businesses running at full capacity, and we're going to have folks who are able to rebuild in North Lincoln County. There were some questions I was really prepared to answer, or at least things that have been at the top of my mind, especially related to COVID and how that's impacting our small business. There's been a lot of outreach and a lot of things on the surface that sound beneficial, whether it's grant funding or various opportunities, and that's really not very substantial to small businesses. Grant funding is not the key. It's incredibly short term, and we need to be more creative with how we tackle this problem. Number one is we need to get some baseline information. Right now, the county has no idea what industries are being affected most and how much they're being affected. We're assuming it's restaurants and it's hospitality, but do we really know that? Number two, we've got to get way more creative with how we can approach things and deal with this issue. The county applying for grant funding is great. However, that doesn't mean all the businesses get that funding. As a business owner, I know you have to apply for that, and it's lottery-based. So that doesn't necessarily go to the folks who need it the most. I think the county needs to explore things like potential personal property tax deferrals or exemptions. We need to be able to provide that technical expertise. We need to do a lot better on our outreach. We need to be more flexible with our regulatory issues. There's a lot of businesses that need to diversify right now, and to do that, they need more permitting. The county has their hands in all sorts of permitting. And if we can streamline the permitting process, that would be fantastic. Just looking at this issue as a business owner, I think gives people a lot different perspective. you're not just going to throw money at it and it's going to go away. What we need to do is figure out how we keep people employed and how we keep businesses open. Throwing a few $1,000s a month is incredibly short term. The other thing is the environment. There's a lot of talk about Lincoln County and the environmental issues here. One thing, I think the county's plan, the climate change plan that's been put together is great, and we're identifying there's a climate change problem. However, we need to lead by example as a county. I want to ask people this: how many fuel-efficient county vehicles do we see? How many solar panel installations do we see on county buildings? Or wind farms sponsored by the county? Or electric vehicle charging stations? Or building practices that are environmentally efficient? I don't see any. These are things I want to address. I'm raising my family here, and I'm operating a business here. I have a vested interest in this. I'm going to soon have a school-age child, and so these are very, very, very important issues to me. I think the county can do a heck of a lot more than what they're doing right now, and we deserve better.
Claire?
My vision for the next few years, I hope we'll look back 3 to 5 years from now and celebrate the robust economic recovery that's happening. We did it before 10 years ago with the Great Recession. I was talking to an economist as we were finally coming out of that curve, and he said Lincoln County's recovery looked much more like what the urban counties were seeing than most of rural Oregon. And I think we've got the skill, the ability, and the vision to go there again. We have talked for years a lot about diversifying beyond our core 3 industries of timber, tourism, and fishing. And I think the county over the last few years has been one of the key players, certainly not the only player, but in really building up marine science, education, and research as another leg of our economy. And even though it hasn't gotten many, if any, headlines, that in the midst of all of our crisis response, we are already in full-blown recovery mode, looking at a child care expansion plan. We've got a broadband task force that I hope is going to get, again, one of those infamous planning grants, but that'll give us a roadmap. Federal government is finally realizing that lack of equitable access to the internet, to broadband services in rural areas is a huge economic and educational impediment, and we want to be poised to do something which I think, people say government should create jobs. We really can't directly create a lot of jobs, but I think we can and we do create the infrastructure, whether it be roads or broadband or housing, that makes a climate where businesses can come in and grow and thrive. When I was first running for this office, and again, I would talk to business people, and really, unfortunately, the story hasn't changed much since I first ran. That when people would tell me I'd ask, what are your impediments to growth? And they said, number one, the lack of decent, affordable housing for families. I think, again, as I talked about earlier this afternoon, thanks to my efforts and the efforts of other folks, we're starting to make progress there, but it's, we're reaping, unfortunately, I think, decades of failure in the public and private sectors to focus on our housing need. We're playing catch up. We're not going to get there overnight. But most of all, I hope that we are celebrating a recovery that still manages to protect and even enhance our overall quality of life.
The topic is contracted services. The City of Yachats began using Oregon Cascades West Council of Governments to handle its financial reporting 16 months ago. It took a year and a lot of work to make that transition, but many city commission members and some of the public still express frustration about the lack of clear, easily understandable financial reports that show how the city is doing on spending and revenue. Question, are you happy with this contract and service? Explain why or why not. And then follow up, what is or should be the council, what should the council be doing to determine if COG is meeting expectations for this service?
Wow.
It's a broad topic.
I disagreed back when the council decided to contract with COG. I felt like it was a mistake. I felt like when we lost the clerk that was doing much budget, that we began to really lose sight of what was happening with our finances. I think that COG came in and promised that if we adopted this new software and if we followed their program, that everything would be rosy, and it hasn't been. We still haven't been getting accurate financial reports, and I don't care how complicated they are. A commission should be able to get regularly produced reports that they can understand and that the public can understand, and we're not getting those. I think that we need to go back to an in-house financial person, director, I don't care what the title is, but I think that our finances are hurting. And I see a lot of, I call it funky math, because we're told we're doing great, but then we don't see the reports that produce that. And I think we put too much trust in our manager who's telling us things are fine. But I just don't think contracting with COG is the way to go.
Well, this is a big one for me as well. I think it's been a disaster from the beginning. I've alluded to that in some other conversations. I think that the city has lowballed, well actually COG lowballed. I don't know what the original negotiations were, but we started out with asking somebody for 1 day a week. I think we're up substantially over that. When I look at the budget numbers for what we're paying for COG's accounting services, it looks to me like it exceeds what we were paying for a full-time staff person who's here 5 days a week. They hired somebody who eventually determined wasn't qualified to do the job after a year's worth of work. The reports, I agree, the reports are difficult to read. I have never seen a budget report that contained fund balance numbers. I was told their fund balance numbers were in there, and I looked and looked and looked. I could not find it. In 2018, January, I asked the city manager to give us a fund balance report, a consolidated fund balance report. After 4 months of asking, it never happened. It was sort of, I was promised, but it never happened. Now that we get fund balance reports, you can't find them, and the way the information is presented is simply not usable for public decision-making by non-technical people. It seems to be if we give you more numbers, you just get lost in the numbers and you can't deduce anything statistically relevant to the decisions you're trying to make. So I heartily support the idea of going back to an in-house accountant where we have more control over the process, more control over the end product, more control over the reporting, which isn't to say that we might not use the same back-end system, but manage it differently.
There seemed to be a lack of financial expertise. The books, as I understood them from the people I talked to when I came into the council, were somewhat messed up. One of our local people here that was a consultant that worked with the city officials or city employees trying to straighten out the books and worked on that for quite some time. I think it was at least 1.5 years when I was on the council, trying to straighten out the books that they'd inherited from the old administration. I worked with the finance committee, I sit on the finance committee and also on the budget committee, but then every council member is on the budget committee. I do trust the one person on the budget committee that seems to have a background in accounting and finance. a retired CPA, and when I misunderstand something or don't understand things, I ask for his advice and look for his explanations. When he tells me that things are looking good, that things are looking better than they have in the past, and we're getting very close to having reconciled books that will make sense to everybody, I accept that opinion. I don't question it. He has far more expertise in that than I have. But when I came on board, my impression was it was a mess. It's not better than it was before. Thank you.
It's not perfect yet, but it's a far, far cry from what it was 4 years ago or 3 years ago. It's a process to get it to working absolutely perfect. I would agree with the earlier statement that when we went with COG, I think all of us anticipated it would be up and running a lot smoother. Same thing with the financial software. But anytime you make a change, no matter what program you're using, no matter what company you're using, you're going to have some speed bumps, and we have. But I will say that I am a major supporter of using contractors as opposed to hiring our own employees. I've had in my own business, some of my employees were contract employees. If you have a problem, if you hire someone as a contract employee and they don't work out, and we've had that issue come up with some of our contract employees, contract workers, it's much easier to replace that contract worker with someone else. You just go back to that firm, in this case COG, and say this person is not working out to our satisfaction. We need to replace this person with somebody who's going to be a better fit for our organization. You can do that with a contractor. You can't do that very well with your own employee. When we hire employees, they're represented by a labor union. And it's not easy to terminate an employee who was a labor union employee. You better have, it's not easy. And based on my own personal experience with my own business and with what I've seen with the city, we've needed to make some changes. We will probably make some changes again with contracts, but it's much cheaper and easier and less painful to replace the contract worker when you have to. So.
I'm not sure if COG is the problem or if it's our understanding of what our finances are supposed to be doing and who we're reporting to. We report to the citizens, so the system, I see what the budget, how it works, and it all lines up and everything, but you have to really go to school and learn how to read it, and then we made a change this year to all the allocated labor, which made it really, which I'm not in favor of, that particular system, because it makes things more complicated for people to be able to see. We have to make something, even if we have to translate it back after we spit out the business end of it, we have to have something that people can see and that they can understand. This is how much we're spending on staff, this is how much we're spending on electricity, this is how much we're spending on, and of course I understand you have to lump all the staff together, but okay, that's fine. But it just shouldn't be this hard. We spent 45 minutes at Parks and Commons Commission the other day just saying, please, can't you give us this? And there's a resistance to it, and that's what bothers me, because it feels like that I should be able to ask our city manager, don't you want us to be able to understand what the budget says? Because it doesn't feel like she wants us to be, or doesn't want to put the work into making that happen. And, to me, it's a public service to make the budget understandable in some broad sense to your population.
Max.
I've had frustrations, as many have. However, I'm very much aware that the system that we had before the Springbrook system and before we contracted, we had real difficulties. And as one that signs checks, there were times that I could not get a check to sign because we didn't have control over the accounting system. And they had to write the checks, and sometimes it took them several more days to get them after we were promised. So there were a lot of frustrations before we started working with the Cascade Council of Governments. I see a great deal of value in the contracting for reasons that Mayor John suggested, and also the fact that the working together with other municipalities and through the COG, we can obtain better staffing and at less cost, and so it's efficient to do that. We do have, I'm very pleased with the new format of the budget, and as a member of the budget committee each year, it was so much easier for the budget committee to bring forth a budget. And I've been pushing myself for the beginning balance in every account to be available. And finally, that has all happened. And so, like Jim, I have a great deal of confidence in Don Groth, the retired CPA that spends a great deal of time assisting our city manager and the finance committee. So I have a lot of confidence in our finance committee and in the retired CPA that works with us. So I say, let's keep what we've got, let's improve it, and let's work for what we want.
This topic is city budget and staffing. Again, this was collection of several questions that were sent to me over the last 10 days. In the budget that the City Council adopted for 2021, several additional employees were authorized if tax revenues allowed later in the budget year. Are the size and structure of city staff, along with the types of services offered, an administrative function or a policy decision? If you think it is a policy decision, did those deliberations that occur about what those employees would do or the new services would be offered? So this is a policy administrative question folded into the budget deliberations about the potential to hire several new employees.
Yeah, I can see that. Well, I have to start with staff. It depends upon the workload. If the workload builds up to where you need more staff, that becomes a policy question to allow the general manager and the budget process to provide for additional staff when the workload calls for it. And so that's, to me, it's very simple. Yeah, I'm pleased with the way things are going. And I'm particularly pleased with the move over to the 501 building, which will provide more space and more efficiency for the staff. So,
Don.
And could you remind, what else am I supposed to say?
Well, and just, yeah. And so if it's a policy issue, then that goes back to the budget committee and city council.
Right.
I think that's an administrative issue. It's the council's responsibility to give the city manager of any city our goals, what we expect the city manager to accomplish in this coming year, and we give her a budget with which to operate under. It's up to her how she chooses to spend that money. And it's important for us as a council to empower the manager to operate within the budget and the guidelines and the goals that we give her. It's true for our city, it's true for large companies, small companies. You can't hamstring whoever you hire to manage your organization, whatever the organization is. You have to give that manager the freedom to do his or her job to represent you. Every year, we review the city's manager's performance of how well she performed with the budget? How well she performed in meeting the goals that we gave her the prior year? We're in the process of doing that right now, and her review will be performed later this month. Every 2 years, her contract comes up for renewal. If the city council at that time, when it comes up for renewal, feels like it's time for a change, then the council will make that policy decision of making a change. But the hiring to me is an administrative issue.
Well, I think it's a combination of things. I think basically what the statement says, if our budget allows, a lot of the things that go on basically have to come back to the council. And I feel confident that if some decision was made along those lines, that the city manager would in fact come back to the council for approval.
Well, I think there's some confusion here, because I disagree. I believe the decision about whether to add staff is definitely a policy decision. It needs to be discussed by the council. Council needs to direct the city manager to put the money in the budget, or we talk about hiring. I don't disagree with the mayor's comment about hiring is the responsibility of the city manager. But whether or not an employee needs to be added to the budget is clearly a policy decision. And I think the voters expect the council to make those decisions.
And